The Six Wives of Henry VIII. Anne Boleyn. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, and thank you for joining me as we take a historical analysis of the six wives of Henry VIII to make a determination as to what they are. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, the mother of Queen Elizabeth I, remains one of history's most enigmatic and polarizing figures. Born around 1501, though some sources suggest 1507, into a noble family, Anne rose from a lady-in-waiting at the Tudor court to become Queen of England in 1533, only to meet a tragic end on the scaffold in 1536. Her life was marked by ambition, intellect, and controversy, playing a pivotal role in the English Reformation and the Schism from the Royal Roman Catholic Church. Yet beyond her historical impact, Anne's personality has been dissected endlessly, portrayed variously as a scheming seductress, a reformist intellectual, or a victim of patriarchal power. We're going to look at her character to make a determination using verified historical behaviours drawn from contemporary accounts, biographies, and scholarly analyses. We're going to look at her actions and assess them against my matrix to form a reasoned conclusion. I've looked at sources such as diplomatic reports from ambassadors like Eustace Chapuis, letters from figures such as Thomas Cranwell, and modern interpretations by historians like Eric Ives, Alison Weir, and Susan Bordeaux. Notable examples will illustrate her complexity. Her charitable acts suggest potential empathy. Her sharp temper hints at self-assertion, and her ambition reflects strategic acumen in a dangerous court. She was vilified by Catholic sources as a goggle-eyed whore, while Protestant ones hailed her as a martyr, and therefore we're seeking to draw on a balanced distribution of perspectives to avoid oversimplification. We're going to look at whether she's an empath, a normal, narcissistic, or a narcissist, with the similarities and differences that accord with those base classifications. Anne Boleyn's life provides a rich tapestry of behaviours, drawn from primary sources like the Venetian diplomat Francesco Sanuto's descriptions, Chapuis's dispatches, and her own letters, as well as secondary analyses by Ives in The Life and Death of Anne Boleyn and Bordeaux in The Creation of Anne Boleyn. Born to Thomas Boleyn, a diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard, Anne was educated in the Netherlands and France from 1513 to 1521, serving in the households of Margaret of Austria and Queen Claude. This continental exposure shaped her into a sophisticated French-influenced woman, elegant in dress, fluent in languages, and versed in poetry, music, and reformist theology. Returning to England in 1522, she joined Catherine of Aragon's court, where her wit and style quickly drew attention. One of Anne's most verified traits was her intelligence and intellectual pursuits. Contemporary accounts, such as George Wyatt's biography, written for her grandson, described her as gifted in musical arts and scholarly pursuits. She read reformist texts, including those by Jacques Lefebvre d'Etaples, and patronised artists and writers. In 1534, she intervened to aid Richard Herman, a merchant persecuted for distributing William Tyndale's English New Testament, writing to Thomas Cromwell, "I beseech you to be good unto him for my sake." This act, recorded in Cromwell's correspondence, shows that she was using her influence for evangelical causes. Might this be compassion for the oppressed, or was it simply the wielding of power because she needed that control? Anne's charitable behaviours are well documented, aligning with evangelical faith rather than mere obligation. As Queen, she distributed alms generously, up to £14,000 annually, far exceeding traditional expectations. Was this demonstrative of considerable emotional empathy for others, or is it showcasing on her part, wanting to exceed other people to make it all about her? She and her ladies sewed shirts and smocks for the poor, as noted in Chapuis's reports, though he dismissed it as propaganda. In 1535, she supported widows and poor households, providing food, clothing, and funds. A letter from her almoner, John Skip, praises her for daily most bountiful giving to the needy. These acts extended to education. She funded scholars at Cambridge and advocated for poor relief reforms, criticising monasteries for hoarding wealth. Bordeaux highlights how Anne's charity was an expression of her evangelical faith, distinguishing her from her predecessors like Catherine, whose piety was more Catholic ritualistic. However, alongside this, Anne's ambition was equally evident and was often portrayed as scheming in hostile sources. She refused Henry's initial advances in 1526 to become his mistress, unlike her sister Mary, insisting on marriage, as per Henry's love letters, which have been preserved in the Vatican. This resistance, lasting 7 years, pressured Henry to annul his marriage to Catherine, leading to the break with Rome. Is this a manipulative act on the part of Anne to get her own way? Anne was certainly driven and ambitious. She influenced policy through her faction, including her father and brother George. She also played a role in Wolsey's downfall in 1529, reportedly gloating over his humiliation. That would appear to demonstrate a degree of pride and vanity on her part, exhibiting strong narcissistic traits, and perhaps exhibiting a lack of emotional empathy for him. Chapuis accused her of plotting against Catherine and Mary Tudor, claiming she urged Henry to execute them, although this is likely exaggerated, as no execution occurred. Anne's temper, narcissistic trait of anger, or is it actually ignited fury? And conflicts provide stark examples of what some would describe as her passionate side. She was quarrelsome with Henry, as Wyatt noted, arguing over policy and his infidelities. In 1536, amid jealousy over Jane Seymour, Anne ripped a locket from Jane's neck, injuring her fingers per Chapuis. She banished her sister Mary from court in 1534 for marrying without permission, showing vanity and entitlement. Her sharp tongue targeted family. She told her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, words shouldn't be used to a dog, according to Lancelot de Carle's poem. Conflicts with Cromwell escalated over monetary dissolutions. Anne wanted funds for charity, Cromwell for the crown, contributing to her downfall. Weir describes her as having violent swings of temper, exacerbated by miscarriages and court stress. Is this an underlying heated, ignited fury, or is it simply the narcissistic trait of anger coming to the fore as a consequence of external stresses? Relational dynamics reveal nuance. Anne showed loyalty to allies, promoting evangelicals like Hugh Latimer as her chaplain. She attempted reconciliation with Mary Tudor in 1534, offering friendship if Mary acknowledged her queenship, but was rebuffed. Later expressing regret for mistreating Mary, per Chapuis, indicating remorse. Was it genuine, or simply more manipulation, by way of false contrition? Toward her daughter Elizabeth, Anne was protective, entrusting her to trusted chaplains like Matthew Parker. Yet she could be flirtatious, engaging in courtly love with poets like Thomas Wyatt, though no adultery evidence exists. Anne's downfall in 1536 involved charges of adultery with 5 men, including her brother George, and plotting Henry's death. Fabricated, as historians like Ives concur, based on Cromwell's orchestration. Her trial behaviour was dignified. She denied charges calmly, showing resilience. Executed on May 19, 1536, her final speech expressed forgiveness. I pray God save the king, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. This composure under duress contrasts with the more impulsive anger that had been seen. These behaviours, charity, ambition, temper, paint Anne as assertive in a male-dominated world where women's agency was limited. French education fostered her independence, but court politics demanded cunning. Biased sources like Nicholas Sanders' Catholic polemic, calling her ambitious and proud, must be weighed against Protestant hagiographies. Anne's charitable acts strongly suggest emotional empathy. Distributing alms, sewing for the poor, and aiding persecuted reformers like Herman demonstrate apparent genuine concern and not mere performance, particularly as she risked alienating conservatives. Empaths can be seen as blessing to others, spreading resources. Anne's evangelical drive mirrors this, prioritising societal welfare over personal gain. Her regret over Mary Tudor's treatment shows remorse, which is ordinarily absent in narcissists. Entrusting her daughter to Parker reflects maternal care. She does appear to show some compassion and resilience, but her empathy does not appear to be boundless. For instance, banishing her own sister indicates some degree of self-interest. Her ambition and temper are narcissistic elements. Refusing mistress status and pushing for queenship displays entitlement and grandiosity. Her influence over Henry, shaping the Reformation, shows some understanding of his desires, a son, independence for Rome, and seeking to manipulate outcomes in that regard. The accusations of plotting against Catherine and Mary imply envy and diminished empathy. Her sharp tongue and conflicts, like the Jane Seymour incident, reflect anger, or is it rage when threatened? Is it a devaluation of a rival? Vanity in fashion and PR, trend-setting sleeves for example, echo grandiosity. The evidence, however, against her being completely a narcissist is compelling. Narcissists have no remorse. Anne expressed regret and forgiveness in her scaffold speech, and the manner in which it was reported suggests that it was genuine. Narcissists use people, picking them up and putting them down through the shelving dynamic, and yet Anne Boleyn maintained loyalties. She promoted allies. There was no consistent manipulation pattern. In fact, the scheming that she engaged in was simply survival in a court where women were pawns. One has to look at her ambition. It was contextual. It wasn't pathological. In a patriarchal era, assertiveness was labelled shrewish. Her flares of temper were reactive and were not abusive. Her wit was genuine. She fostered real friendships. There doesn't appear to be a pathological need for control with Anne Boleyn. The accusations of infidelity, something of course which is often found with narcissists, are now understood to be a fabrication of part of Cromwell's plotting against her. While she certainly has narcissistic traits, and they did appear to be strong, in relation to anger, argumentativeness, pride, and vanity, she also exhibited genuine compassion, as exhibited by her charitable work and her loyalty to people. The fact is that she exhibited some degree of jealousy and envy, narcissistic traits, but for those around her, for Henry, for her daughter Elizabeth, she clearly showed compassion, love, and caring. Ultimately, when one looks at the wealth of evidence in relation to the life of Anne Boleyn, which I have distilled into the examples that I have provided you, and looking at it in context, we see an individual that does have emotional empathy, which immediately means she could not be labelled a narcissist. Whilst there's certain self-interest, it's also the case that her behaviours exhibited more emotional empathy and a lack of selfishness compared to that of a narcissistic individual, and therefore we reject that. This leaves us with normal and empath. It appears to me on balance that her behaviours had sufficient self-interest and not an overwhelming concern for others. The charitable actions, of course, were commensurate with what was expected of her and do demonstrate emotional empathy, but her concerns were more centralised around her, and the presence of the particularly strong narcissistic traits, the argumentativeness and such like, demonstrate that self-preservation was important to her, particularly in the patriarchal society that she found herself in. The nastiness of behaviours that were exhibited to individuals outside of her circle of empathy militate against her being an empath, and therefore the conclusion is that Anne Boleyn was a normal, an individual that had both empathic and narcissistic traits, emotional empathy, but for a smaller circle of individuals around her. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.